Hello, welcome back to our next episode of Forever Young Adult Book Talks. We took a little bit of time off for the holidays and summer break, so we hope that you guys had a good holiday weekend. Hope that you stayed distant, stayed safe, um, followed all the rules, but still had a good time. So this week's episode, this month's episode, whatever you want to call it, we chose to talk about the American dream, which looks different for everybody, right? Your American dream is different than mine, than Misty's, than Adrian's, than anybody, right? And a lot of the way it looks different is based on you. Your dream might look different if you don't have a lot of money. Your dream might look different if you are a different skin color than your neighbor. So we chose this theme because it's really important to us as readers and important to us as educators to make sure that our students and our readers get a preview, get a window into other people's, what their dreams look like, what their hopes and wishes are for, right? We keep circling back to this conversation about windows and mirrors in our literature choices. And it's even more important now in the culture and climate of the world that we live in, with the global pandemic going on and all the social justice issues that are popping up constantly all over the world and all over our city and all over our country and our states. So for me, at least, it's really important to, like I said, give a window into other people's dreams and other people's lives. But it's also really important to pick a novel and pick a dream that is fiction, that it takes a break. It's fantasy. It's a mystery novel. It's superheroes, so that you're taking care of yourself to keep your dream alive, but also recognizing that other people have dreams and they're just as important as your dreams. So the first person who's going to start us off today talking about the American dream is going to be Misty.
Hello, you all. Long time no see. Thank you, Katie, for that introduction. I have to admit, I started thinking about what our theme was, the American dream, and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know which of these books I can talk about. And I started really thinking about it, and I decided that I'm going to share. It's a little bit older, but it's still a oldie but goodie. It came out in 2012, and it is one of my actual favorite nonfiction books, and it is Superman versus the Ku Klux Klan. And it is the true story of how the iconic superhero battled the men of hate. So I'm a huge superhero fan, especially DC. So that means Superman, and that includes Batman and Wonder Woman and so forth. Aquaman, he's getting there. But Superman, if you didn't realize it, is one of our first American iconic superheroes. He debuted in 1938, and he was created by two Jewish teenage boys. Well, what this book does is it's like a chapter gives you an overview of Superman, the history of Superman, and then it gives you a chapter history of the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK. You may know what that is. You may not know what it is, but it is a hate group, and they were predominantly popular in the early part of the 20th century. But that doesn't mean they're not around now. They still are. But for the KKK, Superman, when he was created, we were actually entering World War II. And in the comics, they made a big deal about, like, well, why is Superman? Why can't he go fight? He can go fight Hitler, and he can go save everyone because he's Superman. Well, he didn't pass his test to join the army because he could see through the eye chart into like 5 rooms away. So that's how they kept Superman at home. So he decides, well, since I can't be a hero and fighting like the soldiers overseas, I'm going to fight the hate that I see here in America. And so on the radio show for Superman and in the comics, the group is known as just Men of Hate. That's really what they're called. They weren't called the Ku Klux Klan, but it was modeled on the Ku Klux Klan. Rick Bowers does an awesome story of weaving in 2 parts of history that are fascinating, just to even think that things like this existed and the things that happened, a travesty. And then thinking about the importance of superheroes and how they give us something to look forward to. And if you're familiar with Superman at all, which I will talk a little bit about Superman himself later on tonight. But Superman, I mean, he's actually even denounced his American citizenship later on and said, I fight for everyone. I am a superhero of the world. Even though he really started out as our American superhero, our first. So it's a nonfiction book. Again, it has lots of pictures in it though. So it kind of makes you want to read it. Has, again, the history of Superman, history of the beginning part of the civil rights. Rick Bowers wrote a companion book about the civil rights movement that occurred just a few years after the KKK and Superman's birth. So I strongly suggest you check it out. I love it. I highly recommend it. And now off to Steve.
Hi, everyone. So I'm excited to talk to you about this book, The First Rule of Punk by Celia C. Perez. And it's about punk rock, so I had to wear my Rancid t-shirt. They're one of my favorite punk and ska bands of all time. And I think this book is appropriate for our theme of American dream and American identity. I mean, if you know anything about punk or punk rock, or the ethos behind it, you understand that at its core, it's always individuality. Be yourself, right? Embrace that. Embrace your uniqueness and don't be afraid to be different. So this book embodies that. It's about, and by the way, this is more of a younger reader book. It's really appropriate for probably like 5th through 7th grade. It's the story of Maria Luisa, who prefers to go by Malu, and her family moves from Florida to Chicago at the beginning of her 7th grade year. So because her mom gets a professor job, a college teaching job out there, so she's uprooted and away from her dad and living with her mom in Chicago and starting a new school at the beginning of 7th grade. She feels like she doesn't fit in, and she's trying to find her identity. Sort of at the beginning of the book, in her first day of school, she gets in trouble for wearing too much eyeliner, kind of starting to embrace the aesthetic of punk. And she feels like she doesn't quite fit in at this new school. And she's, by the way, something I forgot to mention is she's biracial, so she's sort of struggling with that identity as well. And there's kids at the school who are like full Latino, and they kind of, there's one girl in particular, and they kind of butt heads a little bit. And one day, one of the girl calls her a coconut, which is something Malu has never heard that term before, and that's more of a slang term meant to be an insulting term for typically used for like biracial of Latino and Caucasian descent, for someone who's may appear to be Mexican or Latino, but sort of more assimilates into like white culture and suburban culture. So she gets called that term, and she doesn't quite understand it because, the girl who calls her that is into the Mexican dance and more of her heritage. And here's this girl who doesn't kind of fit in, and she's kind of a punk rock girl. And she meets this kid who is in a band, and this other kid who plays in a mariachi band, and she wants to form a punk band to play for their talent show, and they end up calling themselves the Cocos. And I think that is very punk rock, because it's taking something that someone else has said to you or tried to judge you by, and it's flipped it and turned it in their face. And I think that is a very punk rock thing to do. If you look at people of different ethnicities and cultures, that's something that lots of people have done. I could probably give you lots of examples. You can think of them, but basically taking a slur or something like that and flipping it into back at them, and by claiming it as your own with a different twist, it's empowering. So this is the story of this girl's 7th grade year forming a band, a punk band, and finding her identity. And it's just, and she also writes zines. So there's these inner chapters where she's putting together zines, trying to figure out, what's going on with her trying to start a punk band. It's just a fun read, and it really is deeper than I thought. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Amanda.
Hey guys, it's really good to be back. I'm glad to see everybody. The first book that I'm going to talk about tonight is called The Courage Test, and this is actually a book I use in my classroom. I teach 8th grade social studies, and thanks to this book club, I got the courage a few years ago to find a novel and really jump into it head on, and the kids absolutely have loved it. So The Courage Test is about a young boy named Will, and Will is your typical preteen boy, and he's struggling because his parents are in the middle of a very messy divorce. And he's really lost connection with his dad because his dad has found love with another woman. And so he really has held his dad at arm's distance. And his summer is coming around and he loves baseball. He can't wait to play baseball. And it turns out that everything is going to get put on hold. We know what that's like, right? Because his dad wants to take him on a trip. And his dad is a history professor, and his focus is American history, and specifically his specialty is the Lewis and Clark expedition. And so what his dad wants to do is to bring his son closer to him by following Lewis and Clark's trek across America. And so through this trip, Will learns about his dad, he learns about his mom, he learns about himself, and you meet different characters and kind of what America means to them and what this expedition, the positives and the negatives, and there were a lot. And the two characters I think that are the most compelling are Maria, who is about his age, who they run into, and it turns out that she is an illegal immigrant and she is pregnant, and she came across them in hopes to find a better life for herself and this new life that she is going to be responsible for soon. And so they help her find her family. In addition, we meet Ollie, who is a descendant of the Nez Perce tribe, and we learn a lot about the not so pretty history between the American government and Native Americans. And the reason Ollie really hits home for me is because there's a great conversation between Will's dad and Ollie disagreeing about what kind of happened with the Lewis and Clark expedition and what its legacy should be. Because Will's dad really believes that it is about the wheels of time turning and progression and all of these things. And Ollie sees it a little bit differently from the perspective of tribes. And I think that's an important conversation because at the end of that conversation, they're still friends. They see each other's sides. They have a good conversation about it. And the reader gets to see both ends. But they don't hate each other. They still respect each other. And I think that that's a big deal. And a big thing that we can teach our kids is that they can disagree. And it doesn't make one of them bad. They can still be friends in the end. And so this is just a great book. And there's a really big twist and turn. There's bears. There's excitement. There's adventure. But The Courage Test, it's great. And I really encourage you guys because it's a very quick read. It's for middle school kiddos. It's a very quick read. So Courage Test. I'm going to hand it over to Katie now. Thanks, guys.
Hello, it's Katie. So I chose a book that my friend Adrian and I subscribe to this crate called Once Upon a Book Club. And every month they send you a new book and you get little gifts and things like that. It's a really cool subscription. If you want to know more, let me know. But the book we got sent this month is a American Revolution history called Rebel Spy by Veronica Rossi. This book is about a young girl who lives in the Caribbean. Her name is Franny. Franny lives with her stepfather, who is awful, abusive, and just mean to her and torturous, and he's a bad guy. And so Franny, like I said, lives in the Caribbean, and they are wreckers. So they go diving for treasure that's come off of ships that wreck near their island. And so one day there's a ship that wrecks near them and upwashes a young woman who died in the shipwreck. Franny and her friend see that as her opportunity to escape the terrible life she's had in the Caribbean. So she takes on the identity of this young woman who died in the wreck, and her name is Emmeline Coates. And Emmeline Coates is a very upstanding young English woman who is on her way to New York to live with her new guardian. Franny has to learn all of these things on the ship. And while she's doing that, she starts to learn that her reality in the Caribbean as a poor young woman is not the reality of everybody else. There's lots of political unrest. She meets a character, his name is Asa. he is a revolutionary for the American Revolution, and so that changes her perspective on a lot of things as well. And so she lands in New York and starts to ingratiate herself into high society as a young British woman, and then decides to become a spy for the American Revolution. She starts to learn of actually, the American Revolution has some really great points, and it's changed the way she thinks about reality. So she becomes an undercover spy. And this novel is based on a true account of a woman that records only know as 355. That was their spy code for lady, and that's all they know about her. So Veronica Rossi learned about that, did the history about her, and then developed this fictitious story about a young woman who becomes known as 355. There's some heartbreak. There's definitely a lot of intrigue. There's real revolutionary characters we know, especially from our history that we're taught most commonly in the U.S. George Washington makes an appearance. So I thought this book was really timely. It was fun to read. It was not. It was nice to see Franny/Emmeline grow as a character. And it was especially well timed with the arrival shortly after 4th of July and shortly after Hamilton was released on Disney Plus, which even if you're not a big Broadway fan, Hamilton was like everybody and their mother was talking about the release of Hamilton on Disney Plus, which is about the American Revolution. So they seemed like a well-made match to read and watch in the same weekend. So Veronica Rossi, Rebel Spy, check it out. And now I have to check the list and see who I'm passing it on over to, but I'm going to send it over to my friend Adrian.
Thank you, Katie. I also loved that book, Rebel Spy, so I just want to add that on. The first book that I'm going to talk about is one of my all-time favorites, Moxie by Jennifer Matthew. I'm obsessed with this book, and I think everyone should read it. The book is narrated by Vivian Carter. She's a good girl who attends high school in a small town in Texas that worships the football team. It seems designed to keep its female population oppressed and subjected to sexist behaviors and comments on a daily basis about their bodies and the clothes that they're wearing. Very different standards for the girls in the school versus the boys. She gets inspired by her mother's younger days as a member of a punk rock feminist movement called Riot Girl in the early 90s. Vivian decides to fight back by publishing an anonymous underground feminist magazine, which slowly turns into a quiet and then much louder movement at her school. I really feel like Moxie should be required reading for every teenager, both male and female. This book somehow manages to do it all in terms of young adult fiction. It has an incredibly dynamic main character. It includes a fantastic teenage romance, complex friendships, parents worthy of several eye rolls, and plenty of high school drama. However, Moxie also includes crucial lessons about gender inequality and racial divide. Moxie also serves as an incredible introductory guide to feminism for all teenagers. First and foremost, the behavior of the boys at Vivian's school and the lack of response from the administration and teachers highlights the need for feminism in the first place. And the response of some members of the female population of the school also demonstrates a lot of the reasons why girls are hesitant to speak up for themselves and adopt the cause. Finally, Matthew also does an excellent job highlighting the concept of intersectionality and showing that within females we divide ourselves because of issues of race, sexuality, and class, and that feminism is truly a movement that encompasses us all, not just middle-class white women. Vivian, I love her character. She's highly relatable. I think that the author made an excellent decision by making her a straight-laced student instead of a born rebel. The decision showed power in stepping outside our comfort zones to stand up for the things we believe in. And the change that Vivian underwent throughout the book was like a rallying cry for all the girls in the world who are tired of being subjected to sexism. The behavior of the football players at Vivian's school is pretty extreme. Readers may be left wondering about the intensity which the author feels toward them, and Vivian and her friends describe them as. However, I think the book makes an important statement about the power of the group mentality and the overwhelming importance many schools in our country place on male athletes in comparison to females. I highly recommend it, 5 out of 5. And now on to Amanda.
Hey everyone, I'm back. So my second book is another really great book from the middle levels, and it's called The Lightning Queen, and I picked this up at a book fair, and I just saw the cover really kind of blew me away because it's really cool. So The Lightning Queen is about Mateo, who lives in New England, and his mother immigrated to New England from Mexico when she was much younger. And if I remember correctly, she's a doctor, but they go back to see his family. And his grandfather is a healer in the small village that his mother grew up in, and him and his grandfather are very close. His grandfather's also named Mateo, and his grandfather takes on the role as kind of like a storyteller in this book and tells him a story about when he was Mateo's age. Gypsies would come to their small town, their small village in Mexico, and show movies. And according to the author, this was a really common thing for gypsies to do all across Mexico. And some of these, because I forgot to say this, the village and Mateo's family, they're indigenous too. They're indigenous people of Mexico. And so it was a really interesting connection that the author found in history, this connection between the indigenous people of Mexico and gypsies, because they both were kind of on the outskirts of society and looked down upon. And so as Mateo's grandfather is telling him his story, it's full of heartbreak. He had a twin sister who had passed away, father who had been hit by a car and killed. And there was just a lot of sorrow in Mateo's life. And then the Lightning Queen came, and she was a young gypsy girl his age. And there was just something vibrant about her. She wanted to be a singer when she grew up. And she told him that they were going to be best friends forever. And every year she returned with her gypsy tribe to show movies. And every year her and Mateo became closer and closer until finally she stopped coming. And eventually, I don't want to give away too much, but she does end up in America looking for her American dream. And yeah, I don't want to give away the ending because it's really good. And it's a really quick read. And it really taught me a lot about a lot of different cultures. And just like Katie had said about the windows into different worlds. It's a great read. I would suggest it for anybody. And that's all about The Lightning Queen. I'm going to hand it over to Deborah, who's going to talk about one of my favorite series. Take it away, Deborah. Thanks, guys.
Hey, guys. Welcome back. So I am working on a series. It's called Truly Devious. Here's the first one. I read that one online, so that's a copy of the first one. This is the second one, The Vanishing Stair, and I'm almost halfway through this one. There's a third in this series that's been published, The Hand in the Wall, and then there's an additional novel that takes place with the same main character, but a different setting. I think it's either coming out or has just come out this year. So all told, it hasn't come out yet. So it will be coming out soon, though. So think of Truly Devious is really kind of an Agatha Christie for young adults. The protagonist is Stevie. She's a young woman. Her name is Stephanie, but she goes by Stevie. She's a little bit quirky, and she has a passion for true crime and detective work. She wants to be a detective. She studies true crime. She loves unsolved cases. She's also very bright. And so her passion for this or obsession with true crime has led her to be invited to go to the Ellingham Academy, which is a private school founded many years prior by a very rich and eccentric old man named Albert Ellingham, who thought that he ought to have a school to foster love of learning with people with special talents. So the school is full of strange children, and it's kind of like Hogwarts, but without the magic. Albert Ellingham is now gone. He's long dead. But one of the reasons that Stevie wants to go to Ellingham Academy is because there is a mystery that happened in the 1930s when Albert Ellingham was still alive. His wife and daughter were kidnapped from Ellingham's estate there. And a young girl who went to school there was found dead in connection with that kidnapping. And then later, the wife and the daughter were also found dead, and the case was never solved. It was a cold case, and it has obsessed Stevie for years. So she's thrilled with the opportunity to go to Ellingham Academy and study up on her true crime. She gets there, she meets some other kids, and lo and behold, a murder happens there at the Ellingham Academy while she's there, and she gets to try to solve that. So it's a cold case that she's solving. So the novel actually is told in two storylines. The first is Stevie at Ellingham Academy, present day, solving a murder mystery. And then there's the old cold case. So we flash back to the 1930s, and we get bits and pieces of that case coming forward in another storyline. Those two storylines run parallel. Stevie is trying to solve the old case and the new case both at the same time. And so the reader gets kind of sucked into that. There is, of course, a little bit of romance. She gets involved with a young man who has secrets of his own. I won't give away those secrets, but they have to do with someone that Stevie's not fond of. I love the characters. They're fun. They're a little bit strange and quirky. The students are all over the place. There's a lot of action. There's some mayhem, and there's some riddles to be solved. One of the clues that led to the title, one of the clues of the original case, was a pieced together note, ransom note, that was signed Truly Devious. And so part of the mystery is to figure out who Truly Devious is and what really happened. So I recommend it, Truly Devious, Maureen Johnson, set of 3 books. Go find it. It's great. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Adrienne.
Thank you. Let me get back over here. Thanks, Deborah. The second book I'm going to talk about is a graphic novel called Harley Quinn Breaking Glass. It's by Mariko Tamaki and illustrated by Steve Pugh. This is one of the graphic novels in DC's YA imprint called DC Ink. Although it strays from canon, I really liked this iteration of Harley's story. The author reinterprets Harley as a high school girl living in Gotham City. It uses a background of income inequality and the power structures that reinforce it. It tells the story of how Harley finds a group of misfits to call family and the struggles they go through to find joy in a world that just wants to bring them down. It introduces Ivy and her parents and the ways that they challenge the status quo of the city's elite. The spoiled sons of the wealthy demonstrate all the sociopathic tendencies one would expect from children who have never had to face the consequences of their action. The main one being John Kane, heir to the Kane fortune and Millennium Enterprises. He leads the whole bunch. Harley discovers her own performance identity as the story progresses, learning from drag queens how to express her bubbly personality through flamboyance. I especially liked how the author was able to let Harley be quirky, but also be reflective and show that there's accountability for her actions. Ivy's great in this graphic novel, and I hope she gets her own book in the series. Even though the characters were a bit different than their common comic counterparts, Harley and Ivy's connection and the way they balance each other remain true. And now I'm going to turn it back to Misty.
Okay, welcome back. And so I am going to conclude. I started talking about Superman, remember, with KKK. And so now what I'm going to do is continuing what Adrienne just talked about with the DC Ink print for the graphic novels. What DC also started publishing, it was their DC Icons. And their DC Icons, if you see right here, there's 4 of them. And I'm going to talk about Superman Dawnbreaker, which was actually the 4th one to be released. And there's one on Batman, who's the best. There's one on Catwoman, which actually is the best book of the 4. And there's one on Wonder Woman. And actually, what am I saying? All 4 of them are awesome. And even though I told you earlier that Superman's not one of my favorite superheroes, I mean, I just always thought Superman, he got all the glory. Everything's always about all Superman. Superman does this. Superman can do that. He's so awesome. Okay, I get it. He's awesome. Okay. We won't have a debate about who's better, Superman or Batman, but it is Batman, just so that you know. But I read this and I was like, it's probably going to be my least favorite. Oh my goodness. It became probably my top of the 4 books. I absolutely loved it. And the author is Matt De La Pena, and he has written other books. He is a YA author. And so Superman, what the DC Icon series does is it rewrites the origin stories of these 4, for now, the 4 superheroes that I mentioned. So this is a story about Clark Kent as he's growing up in Smallville. And so if you watch the TV show Smallville, which is a little bit dated, but it was popular a few years ago, it's about young Superman. And so in here, Superman has just started to become aware that he has a little bit something that separates him as different from everybody else. He knows that he has a few powers, but he just thinks he's just an extraordinary type of human. He doesn't know anything yet about his Kryptonian heritage. He doesn't know anything about where he comes from. So Superman, your typical high school boy, he actually is playing football, and he quits the football team because he realizes that he's actually a risk. His abilities are a risk to the other players, because even though he's really fast and he can tackle, he's afraid that he's going to hurt them. So he actually quits the football team, which really upsets his friends because they were a really good football team and they really miss him. And he can't tell them why he quit. He's just, I'm going to focus on school. So he is your fairly normal high school teenage boy, and he goes about, and you meet through him a bunch of Smallville residents. And he comes across a girl who he hears crying, and no, it's not Lois Lane. It's not even Lana Lang. It's actually Gloria Alvarez. So another female is added to the story. Those of you familiar with Superman, you'll know that his grown-up persona is Lois Lane, but his high school girlfriend was Lana Lang. And so I know they sound alike. It's weird. But he meets Gloria, and Gloria is crying because what we're finding out is that in Smallville, there are some people disappearing, and the people who are disappearing are mainly Mexican immigrants. And there's a lot of racial tensions that are happening in Smallville. And there's this corporation, and there's some suspicious activity. So Clark decides, well, I'm do a little bit of investigating, and he and Lana decide to help out Gloria. So it's a story about them. Now, it's not just a story about Superman growing up. What I really love that Matt Della Pena did is that he took something that was happening in society. He took an issue that is prevalent in society right now, and he turned it into a book that would be attractive towards teenagers, towards anybody who's a fan of superheroes. But he writes about these themes of immigration, and he writes about stop and search laws, and he writes about racism, and he explores them pretty heavily throughout the book as the tensions in Smallville, their community, day by day, something else is happening. As you know, I mean, Superman, he is known as like this all-American superhero. And so in this book, he witnesses one of his first hate crimes. And he has to decide, well, how am I going to handle this? And what am I going to do? And he knows that he has the power, or some power, to hurt others, to make them realize what they're doing is wrong. But that's not who Superman is. So it becomes also a moral, not argument, but a moral dilemma for him of how am I going to use the power that I have? And actually what it comes down to is that just like all of us, he uses the power of just his words and the power of his actions to make changes in his society, proving that you don't need to be a superhero to actually create change in the world around us. So 150% recommend this book. Again, not a Superman fan. See, there you go. But I love it. I absolutely love it. I think it's timely. It came out last year in 2019. I think it is amazing. I think it really makes you think critically about the world around us and what we can each do to make our communities more safe. And isn't that really what the American dream is? Thinking about what is it that we want in life, and thinking about this phrase of the American dream that goes back to like the 1930s, and thinking about our dream of a land, from the quote from James Treslow Adams in his best-selling 1931 book, Epic of America. He described this term, the American dream, as that dream of a land in which life should be better and richer and fuller for everyone, with opportunity for each according to ability or achievement. So it's interesting. We could have another whole talk about this, but this idea about the American dream, it's been almost 100 years, and probably argue longer than that, to think about what is it that we want to fight for? What is it that we hold dear? What is it that we want to plan a revolution for, as Katie talked about with Hamilton? What is it that we want to do that we think is right? So if you liked tonight's talks, tune in 2 weeks, which I believe will be July 31st, I believe. And in 2 weeks, we will be back. It'll be one of our last talks before school starts. Well, what we think when school is going to start. We're not 100% sure on that, but whatever. We'll still be doing some book talks. And so tune in 2 weeks to hear us talk about some of our favorite books that we have read over this summer and during maybe we'll create our own COVID quarantine reading list of favorites. So thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions or comments, you're welcome to go to our website and shoot us an email. Just in case you don't know what our website is, our website can be found at foreveryoungadult.com. So that's for as in the number, ever, youngadult.com. And we hope to see you there. And so everybody else can say good night.
Good night.
Good night.